I want to talk to you about something that happened in Berea this morning. Because if you know anything about this Browns quarterback room right now, you know every single word that gets said before practice carries weight it shouldn't have to carry. Day 4 of training camp, and before Shedeur Sanders even stepped foot on that field, he had a microphone in his face and a stadium full of doubters waiting to hear him slip up. He didn't. And honestly, what he said left me sitting there thinking about this kid differently than I did 24 hours ago. Let me set the scene for you first because context matters here. Deshaun Sanders had already addressed reporters right before this, and Todd Monken was scheduled to follow. I'll get into what Coach Prime had to say and give you the full breakdown of practice in a separate rundown, but right now, I need you locked in on this moment, because this is the one that actually tells you where Shedeur's head is at heading into a season that's going to define the rest of his career. And I don't think I'm overstating that. Every camp report, every practice snap count, every completion, it all gets filtered through this ongoing story about the Cleveland quarterback room, a room that includes a former Pro Bowl arm in Deshaun Watson still trying to prove his body will hold up, a veteran in Jameis Winston who's seen every version of quarterback controversy there is, a fellow rookie in Dillon Gabriel fighting for his own share of reps, and Shedeur, the guy who fell further in the draft than almost anyone expected and has been carrying that chip on his shoulder ever since. So when a reporter puts a microphone in front of him, it's never really just a football question. It's an invitation to either feed a storyline or starve it. And what I watched this morning was a young man who's gotten remarkably good at starving it. The question that opened everything was about Miami. A few weeks back, Shedeur had mentioned putting in work down there with his brother Shiloh and a handful of other guys, grinding on things away from the cameras, away from the coaches, just building chemistry on their own time. So naturally, someone wanted to know how much of that off-season grind is actually translating now that camp is live. And Shedeur's answer told me everything about how this kid thinks. He didn't brush it off as some throwaway off-season workout session. He talked about how every single rep, no matter when it happens or who's involved, matters. He pointed out that even the guys who couldn't make it down to Miami are still being folded into the process, that conversations happen constantly inside the building, extra work gets put in after practice wraps, and all of it, every single one of those reps, builds trust, builds connection. That's not something you say if you're just going through the motions. That's a guy who understands that chemistry isn't built in a single off-season camp. It's built in the 1,000 tiny moments nobody's filming. Then somebody asked him to assess where the team stood after 3 days of camp, and this is where you start to see the discipline underneath the talent. He didn't hand out a scouting report on his teammates. He didn't make bold declarations about how ready this offense looks. He turned the mirror on himself, said he's taking it one day at a time, zeroing in on what he personally needs to sharpen, staying honest about the flaws he's still carrying, and grinding to clean those up. There's a version of a young quarterback who gets a locker room like this one and starts talking about how the pieces are coming together, how the vibes are great, how everyone's clicking. Shedeur skipped all of that and went straight to self-accountability. That's not an accident, that's a mentality. Now here's where it gets personal, and I want you to sit with this one for a second, because this is the part of the interview that actually stopped me in my tracks. Somebody brought up Coach Prime's visit from a few days earlier, and you could hear something shift in Shedeur's voice. He made it clear that when he's between those lines, nothing else exists for him. Football and only football. But the second he stepped off that field and had a moment to actually process it, the truth came out. He hadn't seen his father since the summer. Think about that for a second. This isn't some casual family visit we're talking about. This is a son who's been locked into an entire football operation, grinding through a rookie transition in a new city, under a new coaching staff, carrying the weight of an entire fan base's expectations. And he hadn't laid eyes on his own father in months. And when Coach Prime finally showed up in Berea, Shedeur didn't try to play it cool. He straight up admitted it meant something to him. That excitement was real. That's the human being underneath the helmet, and it's easy to forget that exists when all we do is dissect his completion percentage and his footwork. I keep coming back to that phrase he used, that he lives compartmentalized between the lines and everything else waits until he's off the field. A lot of guys say something like that and it sounds like a rehearsed answer, something a media training session drilled into them. But watch how he described it. He wasn't performing composure. He was describing a survival mechanism. When your last name is Sanders, when your dad built an entire coaching identity on national television, when every mistake you make gets replayed 100 times slower than anyone else's, you learn early that you cannot afford to let the outside world bleed into the huddle. So he builds a wall. Football stays on one side. Family, missing his father, all of that human stuff stays on the other. And for a few days, that wall came down because his dad walked through the door of the building he now calls work. I don't think you can coach that kind of moment into a young player. Either it means something to you or it doesn't, and it was written all over his face that it did. From there, the conversation shifted into the technical side, and this is where I think a lot of casual fans are going to miss just how big of a deal this actually is. Shedeur talked about how the Browns' defense has been giving him a wide variety of different looks in practice, and how that variety is exactly what he needs heading into his second year. He specifically mentioned going back through last season's film, picking apart the mistakes he made, and using that film study to sharpen his pre-snap recognition and his post-snap processing. If you don't follow quarterback development closely, let me translate that for you. Pre-snap reads are about diagnosing the defense before the ball is even snapped, figuring out coverage, spotting blitzes, adjusting the protection. Post-snap reads are about processing everything in real time once the play is live, reading leverage, working through progressions, making split-second decisions with 300-pound humans, trying to end your afternoon. The gap between a rookie quarterback and a franchise quarterback almost always comes down to how fast that processing speed develops. And what Shedeur is describing, getting live, varied defensive looks every single day in camp, is exactly the kind of repetition that accelerates that growth. He's not hoping it clicks. He's actively engineering the conditions for it to click. Somebody followed up on that same thread and asked about the sheer mental load involved, adjusting to all this new information in real time, and Shedeur's response was almost matter-of-fact about it. He said there are going to be good days and bad days. That's just the nature of the process, but he plays his best and feels his most comfortable when he has total command of the information. And that's when he said something that I think gets overlooked way too often. He said he spends every minute, every hour, focused on becoming the best version of a quarterback and a leader he can be, because the more he knows, the more comfortable he becomes as a person, not just as a player. That distinction matters. He's not separating the football version of himself from the human version. For him, mastering the playbook and mastering himself are the same project. Then the interview took a turn that I found genuinely fascinating because someone brought up cadences. Shedeur revealed that in this offense, he's got up to 10 different snap cadences he can use in a single game. 10. Think about how much variation that introduces for a defense trying to time the snap, trying to jump the count, trying to disrupt rhythm before the ball even moves. And when he was asked how that compares to what he ran back at Colorado, his answer was almost blunt in how final it sounded. He said he doesn't really go down memory lane with Colorado anymore. Maybe he catches a highlight here or there by accident, but he's not living in that chapter. He's too locked into this year, this team, this goal, and dwelling on what came before doesn't move him any closer to where he's trying to go. If it doesn't help the team win right now, in his words, it just doesn't matter. That's a level of ruthless present tense focus you don't always get from a guy who spent years being the face of a program, the son of a legend, the center of a media circus at the college level. He's choosing to let go of the past on his own terms. When they pushed him on how difficult it is to actually master 10 different cadences, Shedeur reframed the whole question. He said he wouldn't even call it a challenge, really. He called it a sacrifice. The real question, according to him, is what you're willing to give up in order to build the mental capacity required to hold all of it. He made the point that you can't spread yourself too thin. That answer is a window into how he's built. He's not treating the difficulty of an NFL playbook as some obstacle standing in his way. He's treating it as a series of choices about where his time and energy go, and he's clearly decided that mastering the details is worth whatever he has to sacrifice to get there. Now let's talk about the moment that I think reporters have been circling for weeks, because it finally came up directly. Someone asked whether Shedeur views every practice as some kind of head-to-head race, comparing his reps against the other quarterback in that room, tracking who's ahead and who's behind. You could hear a little bit of fatigue in his response, honestly, and I don't blame him. He basically said he's answered that exact question more times than he can count, and his focus stays locked on himself, on what he personally needs to improve day to day. Whatever narrative people want to build around a quarterback competition, that's on them, not on him. And look, I've been covering this locker room closely enough to tell you exactly why that question keeps getting asked. There's been a steady push from certain corners of the Cleveland media to paint some kind of rift between Shedeur and Deshaun Watson, some kind of simmering tension in that quarterback room. We even saw Jimmy Haslam essentially shut down that narrative directly with a reporter recently, making it pretty clear the front office isn't interested in that storyline either. So when Shedeur deflects a question like this with that level of composure, I don't read it as dodging. I read it as a guy who's smart enough to know exactly what game is being played around him, and he's refusing to participate in it. Think about the incentive structure here for a second, because it explains so much of why this keeps coming up. A rookie versus a veteran with something to prove, in a city that hasn't tasted real quarterback stability in longer than most fans want to admit, that's a story that writes itself and sells itself, whether it's true or not. Division drives clicks. Tension drives headlines. A calm, professional quarterback room where everybody's grinding and rooting for each other doesn't generate the same kind of engagement, so there's a real temptation for reporters to keep circling back to that well, hoping one of these guys eventually slips and gives them the soundbite they're fishing for. Shedeur clearly clocked that pattern a long time ago, which is why his answer had that slight edge of exhaustion to it. He wasn't rude, he wasn't dismissive in a disrespectful way. He just made it clear that he's not going to be the one who hands them that story, no matter how many different angles they try to ask the same question from. From there, the conversation moved toward what's coming next, specifically Monday, which will mark the first practice with pads on. Shedeur's answer here fit perfectly with everything else he'd said. He talked about living in the present, about being locked into today's practice first, and only allowing himself to think about pads and the physicality that comes with them once today's work is actually done. It's a small answer, but it's consistent with the pattern running through this entire interview. Nothing forward-looking gets his attention until what's directly in front of him is finished. The conversation then shifted toward the newer faces in the receiving corps, specifically the connection he's been building with two rookies, Casey and Denzel Boston. Shedeur lit up talking about them, genuinely. He said he's thrilled they're part of the room, that the front office made the right call bringing them in, and that they've already proven they belong by living up to the standards set inside that building. There was a real appreciation in how he talked about watching young players string together daily wins, because as he put it, that kind of consistent daily success compounds over time. That's not just a nice quote, that's the exact mindset that gets rookies trusted with real reps in a starting offense faster than expected. The last thing he touched on was the retooled offensive line, and this is where you got a glimpse of him just being a genuinely happy teammate. He talked about all the different personalities up front now, and instead of that being a challenge to manage, he said it's something he actually loves. Different energy, different vibe walking into the building every day, different way of interacting with each other. He even admitted that over the summer, being away from all of that, he found himself missing it, missing the guys, missing the atmosphere, missing what it feels like to walk back into a room full of people working toward the same thing. Here's my honest read on all of this. Every single answer Shedeur gave, whether it was about Miami reps, cadences, defensive looks, or the quarterback competition question he's clearly tired of hearing, pointed back to the same core mentality. Stay locked into today. Refuse to live in the past. Refuse to get pulled into a narrative he didn't create. Let the tape and the daily work speak instead of the noise around him. And if you watched what happened on the field afterward, that mentality showed up in real time. He went out and lit up the Browns' secondary. 21 completions on 26 attempts, right after admitting how much it meant to finally see his father again. You can draw whatever conclusion you want from that, but I don't think that's a coincidence. I think a young quarterback who feels grounded, who feels supported, who's got that kind of emotional weight lifted even for a moment, plays looser and sees the field clearer. The team gets a day off tomorrow before diving back into it, and I'll be tracking every single development from here, especially once those pads come on Monday and this camp shifts into a completely different gear. Because right now, based on everything I just watched and everything Shedeur just said, this isn't a quarterback who's rattled by the pressure surrounding him in Cleveland. This is a quarterback who's using every ounce of that pressure as fuel, and if Day 4 was any indication, Day 5 is going to be worth watching even closer. What strikes me most, sitting here putting all of this together, is how quiet his confidence actually is. There's no chest thumping in anything he said today. No guarantees, no bold declarations about winning a starting job, no shots fired at anybody in that quarterback room. Just a steady, almost stubborn insistence on staying present, staying accountable to himself, and letting the work do whatever talking needs to be done. That's a hard thing to fake over the course of an entire camp, and it's an even harder thing to sustain once the lights get brighter and the games start counting. But 4 days in, with his father back in his corner and a defense throwing everything they've got at him in practice, Shedeur Sanders looks like a guy who's not just surviving this pressure cooker in Cleveland. He looks like a guy who's starting to thrive inside it, and that, more than any single stat line, is the story I'll be watching unfold as this camp rolls on.